Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We have some news around the playoff finally. We have an agreement between the ACC and the Big 12 for the new revenue deal. We also have some interesting tidbits about Michigan since they've lifted the trophy and become national title champions. There have been some hurdles that they've had to get over. So we'll jump into all of that. Then we have a segment going into all the biggest holes for the biggest contenders in the country, whether that's Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Georgia. We'll jump into all of those teams. And then finally, we have a Hot Take Thursday, and it's going to be all about NIL today. A lot of different hot takes kind of sprinkled in there, but one overarching one that I think some of you might agree with, some of you might not. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get a ton of questions and comments throughout the show. So the best way for you all to see your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here is to use the link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all to see your questions or comments on the screen, and maybe we can have a fun back and forth here. Again, that's gsmcpodcast.net. Alrighty, let's jump right in because there's been a lot of stuff happening around the playoff. There's been a lot of stuff happening around NIL. It's been a crazy time, and I think a lot of us have been waiting for some answers, any type of answers really, about what the future of the playoff looks like, and we've gotten a little bit closer to that starting yesterday. The ACC and the Big 12 presidents voted unanimously to approve the new revenue sharing model in the 2026 playoff and going forward. Ross Dellinger was the first person to have this at Yahoo Sports. He is someone that has been just all over every rumor and news around all of these discussions and everything happening over in Texas. So a huge shout out to him. He's been an incredible resource throughout this whole thing. But the College Football Management Committee, 10 other FBS commissioners, Notre Dame's athletic director are expected to meet soon to go over the deal and to possibly approve it. It seems like all of those people that are involved in that decision are for the deal, so it seems like it'll smoothly flow through there, and they won't necessarily have any other snags. But just to remind you what exactly they're voting on and what exactly the new revenue model is reported at least to look like. So the SEC and the Big Ten are entitled to about 58% of the college football playoff revenue. 32% would go to the ACC and the Big 12, and then about 10% would be heading to Notre Dame and the Group of Five. And the contract is expected to be about $1.3 billion a year starting in 2026. So there's no team in this entire equation that's going to be losing money comparative to what they were making in the old format of the playoffs. So all of these schools pretty much across the country, no matter what conference you're in, you will get more money than you have previously gotten. The SEC and Big Ten is set to go somewhere from about $6 million a year per school to around $20 million. So a huge jump for them. The ACC and the Big 12 are looking to double their total, so still a huge jump for them, but obviously not quite the jump that the SEC and the Big 10 are taking. But considering all of the future realignment moves, so Texas, Oklahoma, all of the teams moving over to the Big 10, the Big Ten and the SEC would have accounted for 72.5% of college football playoff participants since it's been introduced in 2014. Excuse me. So there's a good leg to stand on. I won't argue with that. The SEC and the Big Ten knew they were coming into these discussions with a lot of power and a lot of ability to wield that power however they see fit in a lot of ways. So they came into this with a kind of beating their chests a little bit and definitely have a reason to, but it looks like they might have gotten their way on this one, at least in the short term, because this contract does have what's called a look-in provision in 2028. So that essentially just means they can go over the revenue distribution, go over the format again, and reevaluate it and see if it still holds true to the current state of college football, which is really interesting for a number of reasons because, as we've talked about a number of times on this program, the ACC is in some interesting waters right now with Florida State. Some worry that the conference is going to be kind of a thing of the past here pretty soon, but hopefully that doesn't happen. But if it does, obviously this look-in provision would look a lot different in 2028 than if we had the same format and possibly some Big 12 or some ACC schools started to make a run, because maybe they'd be entitled to more of a cut. But I would tend to believe that in 2028, whenever they do reevaluate this revenue distribution, I tend to believe the SEC and the Big Ten will be even in a better spot than they are today, have even more power than they have today. So it could just be kicking the can down the road a little bit to, the new reality of college football. But for the time being, it looks like everyone's going to stick together for a little bit, which is absolutely incredible. Obviously, the big question of this is, what is the format going to be? And that is something that we still don't have necessarily an answer to. Apparently, they were very, very much focused on the revenue portion of this, which kind of makes me sad as a college football fan, but that's a totally different story. I think there's a lot to look forward to with this new format, and there's a lot to go into. And I think the revenue format, while that's great to get agreed to, obviously all of us want to know the actual format of the games. We want to know who's going to be playing where, who gets auto bids, who doesn't. Does anyone get auto bids? Because that was an idea that was thrown out there earlier this week. But there seem to be about 3 different formats that are actually on the table and being talked about going forward in this next couple of days or to a week. So the first one is a 5+9 format. As of right now, we have a 5+7. So the 5 would be 5 auto bids from the 5 highest ranked conference title winners, and then you would have 9 at-large bids. So it would pretty much mirror the 12-team playoff, but just add 2 more bids for the 14-team. The second one is the one we've talked about a number of times on this program, the 3 to the SEC and the Big Ten in terms of auto bids, 3 auto bids there, 2 auto bids to the Big 12 and the ACC, 1 to the Group of 5 or Notre Dame if they are ranked that high, and then 3 at-large bids is another one that's been kicked around that has not been nearly as popular because of the massive skew towards the SEC and the Big Ten, with them getting 3 auto bids each. It's a pretty big proposal, obviously. And then the final one is very interesting, and one that I had not seen before was 2 auto bids to the SEC and the Big Ten, 1 to the ACC, Big 12, and Group of 5 / Notre Dame, and then 7 at-large bids. So it seems that between these 3 options, it seems that they're heading more and more towards more at-large bids. It seems like they want to keep the playoff committee involved as much as possible, have them actually have a say in the matter, instead of having only 3 teams to pick from, or maybe not having any at all. I know there were some people in that room that were big fans of auto bids, but it seems like they're heading back towards the at-large system, at least a more aggressive at-large system. And I tend to believe that's the correct path. I think at-larges are the correct way to do anything in a sport where you don't get to all play each other, which is a huge problem in college football. Not necessarily a problem, but something that they have to take into account when going into these discussions is you don't really know comparisons between teams in different conferences all the time because they don't get to see each other on the field. So I think keeping as many at-large bids is really important, because there's a reality where some conference champion gets in and doesn't deserve to be in over someone that didn't win a conference title in another conference. So there's a ton to go into here. I would do all at-large bids, but that seems to be something that is not necessarily under big consideration, at least right now. And the first round buys for the SEC and the Big Ten champions have been tabled just because there were a lot of people that were not too keen on that idea. So it makes total sense that they were not keen on that idea, but it looks like that one is going to be a little bit further down the road if that ever happens. But it seems like money was the thing that mattered more than any format in this breakdown of the college football playoff. It felt like we spent a ton of time talking about the different ways to split up the media deals and all of the things like that, and not so much time talking about the actual formatting of the playoff. But at the end of the day, I understand this is the way that things work. I kind of wish that they spent a little bit more time focusing on, fan perspectives, focusing on the coaches' perspectives, focusing on a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, money talks, and that's kind of the way things are. So revenue is obviously a huge part of this, and the reason it's such a huge part of this is something we've talked about throughout this week, which is there are contracts or employment status or revenue sharing or collective bargaining. There are a number of things coming in the world of athlete compensation. So there are a ton of things that are going to start changing. There's a ton of things that are going to need a lot of cash flow. They're going to need a ton of money to handle all of these new expenses that didn't exist before, like possible employment status or revenue sharing with the athletes. So this is obviously a huge hurdle that they had to get over. It was something that I know a lot of those people in that room were fighting over for a very long time. So I'm very glad they finally came to an agreement. I think that's huge. Also, I think one of the big monikers in this, when you're talking about revenue, is a lot of these NIL deals that have kind of started to bubble up, and a lot of the lawsuits that have bubbled up since then. It's very possible that they retroactively owe some NIL money to some of these people, or even TV distribution money. So there's a lot of new expenses coming to college football, and you got to prepare for that any way you can. So the ACC and the Big 12, I think this is kind of just they need to make sure the money is coming in. There was a chance that the SEC and the Big 10 were going to go and take their ball and play elsewhere, and if that were to happen, the amount of money that would have been made would have been a lot less than 32% of whatever the next iteration of the playoff is. So I think they made a calculated decision. I don't think this is necessarily what they wanted to agree to, but at the end of the day, I fully understand why they did this. I think this is not only saving them for the time being in terms of having enough money to deal with all the craziness around college football, but also, as I've talked about a number of times, the SEC and the Big Ten, there were a lot of talks that they kind of wanted to come into this, throw out a couple of crazy ideas that they knew a lot of people were going to be opposed to, and then decide, okay, well, we tried, and then walk away and start their own entity and be the Big Ten, the SEC kind of ACC, NFC format, or AFC, NFC format. And it's one of those things that I understand why the ACC and the Big 12 did it from a financial perspective, but also this is kind of just calling the SEC and the Big Ten's bluff. Like, if you really want to leave, if you really want to put yourself out on, your own island, then go do it. We've agreed to this, kind of crazy proposal of you getting more than half of the revenue from the college football playoff. So the ball's in your court now. So the SEC and the Big Ten, I tend to believe they'll agree to this, partly because of that look-in agreement in 2028, because I think they know and think that they will be much more powerful by then. So this will not be necessarily a long-term thing for them. But at the end of the day, it is the ACC and the Big 12 saying, putting the balls back in the SEC and the Big Ten's court. So it's a really interesting move. I think it's a great move by the ACC and the Big 12, because at the very least, you get transparency from the SEC and the Big Ten. You either get them joining in and everyone being in the same playoff pool and all of that being one cohesive thing, and that would be incredible, or they take their ball and play elsewhere, and then they leave a lot of people really angry, and a lot of people that matter a lot to this sport. So it's going to be really interesting to see how all this plays out. Obviously, the formatting is something that I'm most focused on. I think no auto bids would be the best way to go about it, but I did like a couple of the ideas. The 5+9 format is something that is very interesting. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of starts to play out over the next couple of days. But as of right now, we have a revenue deal. We have the biggest hurdle, it felt like, in this entire process was who's going to get the money, which it always is. So as long as we're over that hurdle, I'm still a little bit worried about some of the deep future, the long-term future of this sport. But at the end of the day, I'll take any good news I can get. And it looks like, as of right now, the playoff is sticking together. It will be including the group of five. It will be including everyone, and we won't have different factions of college football, at least for the time being. So very happy to hear that. Obviously, a lot more to be figured out here, including the formatting, but the first big hurdle has been jumped, which is something that I think a lot of us have been waiting for. So That is obviously great news around the playoff, but we're going to take a short break here. And when we come back, we're going to talk about Michigan. They've had a lot of turnover since their championship and a lot of different things happening around their program. I wanted to jump into how they're handling that and how Sharon Moore is kind of taking over the team. So definitely stick with us for that, and we will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face, yeah. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, no, this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit and stupid. If you choose to live or choose to dip, you choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the new developments in the playoff discussions. The revenue deal seems to have been agreed to by the ACC and the Big 12. Now we just have to wait for everyone else to fall in line. But now let's talk about Michigan. There's been a lot of turnover since their last title. There's been a lot of change with whether it's roster or staff. They have gone through about as much change as anyone in the entire country. But it's been about 64 days since they've won that title, since they've lifted that trophy, and about 60 of those have had something or other to deal with, something or other changing around that program. And one of the big ones, obviously, is Sharon Moore taking over for Jim Harbaugh as head coach. And I love the hire. I think a lot of people love the hire. It felt like a slam dunk. It felt like something that probably took them all of a second and a half to make that decision, because he had done such a great job in the 4 games as interim head coach. He has so much respect across the sport, but especially at Michigan for the job he's done with that offensive line, with that offense in general, in his play calling duties. So a lot of incredible things to like about him, but he is taking a step up. He is becoming a head coach for, I believe, the first time in his career, if I'm not mistaken. So it is a big jump. Also, along with that, 18 players heading off to the draft, and a couple more heading off into the portal. And mainly Keon Saab, the corner that made his way to Alabama, which is a huge loss for this back end that is going to need as many corners as they can. Obviously, Will Johnson is an absolute dude, but they're going to need a guy right next to him that can hold his own the same way that a lot of the guys like Mike Sandristril did in the past. So a ton happening here. One of the most recent developments especially in their staff, has been Mike Hart, the incredible running back coach that everyone absolutely loved, announced he was not returning for the 2024 season, or for the 2025 season. 2024, I'm sorry, I'm all out of whack here. 2024 season, late last week, he decided he was not going to come back. And so they decided to go out and get one of the best running back coaches in the country, and he's right from Ohio State. Tony Alford has decided to take the job at Michigan. He will be the running back coach and the run game coordinator. A massive move by Michigan for 20 different reasons. But number one, obviously, Tony Alford is one of the best running back coaches, one of the best position coaches in the entire country. He has done incredible stuff with the running backs at Ohio State. He has been a big part of Mayan Williams and Travion Henderson becoming the running backs that they've become. I think Travion Henderson might just be the best running back in the country coming back next year. So a ton to like about Tony Alford. And then also, it's always fun when they get to make the Buckeyes mad up in Ann Arbor. I'm sure they're very happy about the guy that they got, but also very happy with where they got him from, because it's always fun when you get to steal one from one of your rivals. But Michigan currently is in a position where there is only one person returning to the role that they had a year ago. Obviously, some guys shifting around the staff, which we'll get to here in a second. But Ron Bellamy, the wide receiver coach, is back. He is back as the wide receiver coach. A huge thing for them because the wide receivers have been really good at Michigan. Obviously, not known for their passing game, not known for a ton of remarkable plays downfield. But at the end of the day, these guys can block really well. These guys run routes incredibly well. Roman Wilson has done incredible things since he's gone into the draft process and has caught a lot of people's eyes. So I think keeping him around is an absolutely huge deal, especially with a guy like Roman Wilson and Cornelius Johnson walking out the building. But spring practice is about to get underway, and I don't think there is a spring practice that is more important than the one in Ann Arbor. I think they have a couple of questions to answer, and I wish this wasn't the biggest question, but it seems to be the quarterback is a position that Michigan fans, I don't necessarily think you need to be overly worried about, but you got to keep your eye on it because as of right now, it looks like it's going to be Alex Orji being the starting quarterback, and he's a great player. He's a great athlete. We saw that last year. There's no two ways about that. But it is a huge jump from going from someone like J.J. McCarthy all the way up to Alex Orji because two totally different play styles. That's why Alex Orji was brought in for a number of different packages. And when he came in, you knew they were doing some type of quarterback run because that's who he is. That's his best attribute. And for J.J. McCarthy, his best attribute was timing and accuracy and putting the ball where it needs to be and doing all the things that made this Michigan offense go because at the end of the day, we all know their money is made on the ground. They run the ball incredibly well as really anyone in the country the last couple of years. Sharon Moore had a massive part to do with that. And I think when you get into this season, you're going to have a guy that can execute through the air because if you can't execute through the air, the run game becomes tough. The same way, if the run game becomes tough, executing through the air becomes tough. So it's a lot of yin and yang. It's a lot of working together. And if Alex Orji can't make those throws that J.J. McCarthy has been just incredible at making throughout his time, just the ones that they don't look flashy by any means. They don't necessarily make your eyes pop open or anything like that, but they're there, and they're there on time, and they're right where they need to be. And I think that's something that is kind of lost in college football today, not necessarily among the coaches. Obviously, they fully understand that's what you need from a quarterback, but I think some fans at times get caught up in the remarkable plays, in the insane plays that some of these guys can make because they're freak athletes, and forget sometimes it's just about running the offense that's in front of you, and J.J. McCarthy did that to just an incredible clip. So replacing that is going to be really, really tough. And there's a lot of different hurdles here. There's a lot of different guys finding their way out. Obviously, we talked about J.J. McCarthy, but Blake Corum on his way out. Obviously, getting Donovan Edwards back is huge, which we'll talk about here in a second. But you also lose wide receiver 1 and 2, Roman Wilson, Cornelius Johnson. You lose 6 offensive linemen. That is just an insane number. Zach Zinter, obviously, a huge part of that. Drake Nugent, another huge part of that. So a lot of guys that were a huge part of their success a year ago on the way to the NFL. Chris Jenkins on the D-line, Junior Colson, their leading tackler from a year ago, Mike Barrett at linebacker, Mike Sanderstrill, as we talked about, all out the door. All of those guys are gone. And don't get me wrong, there is a ton of talent to replace them on the back end. There is a ton of guys that you look up and down this lineup and you still see droves of talent, droves of guys that could absolutely break out and fill those gaps and pretty seamlessly. But at the end of the day, it still is a tightrope walk, especially with all of the coaching changes. Sharon Moore, as we talked about earlier, fantastic coach, has done an incredible amount of things, but a lot of his responsibilities are starting to change around Ann Arbor. One of the things that is a huge change for him is he coached 4 games last year, but he only coached on Saturday. He was the head coach on Saturday, not on Sunday through Friday. Now he is the head coach all week round. He is the guy every single day, and that is definitely an adjustment to make. And it'll be interesting to see how he handles that. he is someone that I have ultimate respect for, ultimate confidence in. So I think he'll handle it more than fine, but it is a big hurdle for him to overcome. Also, he has decided to give up his play calling duties, which he had for a number of years and was a huge reason why they were so successful on offense. He's handing it over to Kurt Campbell, who is calling plays for the first time at a major team. He did call plays for Old Dominion, and they had some really good offenses while he was there, but this is the first time he's going to be, on the big stage in one of the Power 5 schools calling plays, so a huge bump up for him. And a huge, not necessarily a huge risk, but there is definitely some risk involved there. And then Grant Newsome moving over from tight end coach to O-line coach to take over for Sharon Moore. Obviously, Sharon Moore will still have his hand on the offensive line as much as possible, but definitely a lot of switch up in this staff and a lot of things that Sharon Moore has to wrap his head around this spring and get his guys ready to play, because there is a ton of worry around this team, I think, with a lot of their fan bases. You don't want to be the team that won a title and then immediately falls off into the abyss, kind of. But they have a lot of guys to fall back on. And I think it starts with a couple of guys that are coming back next year that just need to be huge for Michigan to be successful. It starts with Donovan Edwards, Colston Loveland, Will Johnson, and Mason Graham. Those guys need to be huge. I think one of the big things we've noticed with Michigan over the past couple of years in the Jim Harbaugh era is no matter what happens, no matter what team they field, they have incredible leadership in that locker room. There are always guys that are at the forefront of every single team meeting, that are always giving everything they have every Saturday. Blake Corum was just remarkable for that, because every time he went out on the field, it felt like he was leaving with a ton of bumps and bruises, some different, maybe a bloody nose from a time or two, and he just kind of embodied what Michigan was for that time being and what Jim Harbaugh was for such a long time. So all these guys need to be need to step into those roles. You're losing J.J. McCarthy. It's very likely that your quarterback will not be your outright leader, just because it is going to be a first-year starter, no matter who it is. So these other guys will have to step up, will have to be very vocal and huge for this team, because if they're not, then a lot of things could kind of start to crumble around them, which no one wants to happen. So I think those guys are huge. Also, they got a couple of guys out of the portal. Josh Preby, a center from Northwestern, is a huge pickup. And then Jayshawn Barham, a linebacker from Maryland, an absolutely massive pickup, especially with Junior Colson and Mike Barrett finding their way to the NFL. You need someone to pick up the slack, and he is a huge pickup for them. He is someone that needs to hit. In fact, both these guys likely need to hit, because, as we know, for Michigan, running the ball, they're going to run it up the middle a number of times early on in those games, and if you can't get pushed at the line of scrimmage, it's going to be a long day. So it'll be interesting to see how all of this kind of comes to fruition. There's a million different things changing. And one of the other fun little tidbits going into Michigan's spring and into their season is they have the biggest target on their back. And it's not necessarily just because they won the title, which is very weird, but obviously that helps. Winning a title, you always want to beat the team that is coming off that. But also, they had quite the big scandal a year ago that made quite a bit of people mad. A number of players, I'm sure, took some exception to that and are not very happy with Michigan. So I'm sure there will be a lot of teams that come into that game with just a little bit more juice, just a little bit more want to. And Michigan, I think, is in a position to handle it, is in a position to prepare for it. But with all of the things changing, with all of the different movements around this program, a lot of things could happen this year. There could be a lot of boom or bust potential possibly in Michigan, especially if that quarterback position is not figured out. But as of right now, if you're a Michigan fan, I would feel okay. Sharon Moore has been the coach for about a month and some change, and he's done an incredible job as far as I'm concerned. He has filled every hole on the staff where there were a lot of holes on the staff after Jim Harbaugh took a number of guys to the NFL level. Jay Harbaugh left for the Seahawks job, so a number of guys jumped off ship, including 10 players or 18 players, excuse me, that are going to the draft. Tons of guys to turn over, tons of things to figure out with Michigan, but right now they're dealing with it pretty seamlessly, as well as you could have hoped, I guess, if you're a Michigan fan. But at the end of the day, the spring and eventually the 2024 season will tell you exactly how far they have come and if these changes are really going to impact them long term. But for right now, you're sitting pretty if you're a Michigan fan. You let the chips fall where they may through spring and into the 2024 season. But that'll do it for the Michigan talk for the time being. When we come back, we're going to talk about the biggest hurdles for some of the top contenders. We will include Michigan in that group, but tons of guys that have incredibly talented teams, but there's just that one area that if they could get a little bit better, everything would be slotted to make a run at a national title. But we will jump into all of those after this break, so definitely stick with us.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back. We just talked about Michigan and some of the hurdles they've had to get over as they go into spring ball and into the 2024 season with Sherrone Moore as their head coach. And now let's talk about some of the contenders. This obviously does include Michigan because they're one of the big-time contenders of this upcoming year if they can figure out some things. And some other teams that need to figure out some things. Let's jump off with Georgia here, a team that a lot of people look around and do not see any holes in this team, and it's hard to find some. I'll be totally honest with you. There is talent littered all over this team. There is so many incredible players, but I've narrowed down the secondary as the place that could be the Achilles heel for Georgia. I think a lot of you are expecting or would expect me to say the wide receivers and the tight ends and the outside talent that is leaving with Ladd McConkey and Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint, and obviously Brock Bowers, the big guy, heading off to the NFL. That is a huge hole, but I think they've done an incredible job filling that with guys that are proven. I think Dominic Lovett is ready to take the next step. Ra Thomas is an absolute beast. And I think adding London Humphreys from Vanderbilt was an absolutely huge pickup. But the secondary is a little bit different of a story. There were a number of guys leaving Athens to the NFL that were in huge positions for this team and were a big part of their success. I think, obviously, there are three guys, really, that kind of set this all off, and it's Tyke Smith, Javon Bullard, and Kamari Lassiter. All of those guys are incredibly hard to replace. There are so many incredible plays that they've made. Tyke Smith does just about everything really well. Javon Bullard is one of the hardest hitters that you will ever see, and Kamari Lassiter makes some just remarkable plays in coverage that I can't even fathom. But they have tons of talent in this room. That is not going to be a problem for Georgia. They did lose A.J. Harris to the portal. He is now at Penn State, so that's another corner that is out the door. So definitely does hurt them a little bit, but plenty of corners to choose from, plenty of guys that can step up. But will they step up is the big question. Daniel Harris is a huge piece for this team going into 2024. Dalen Everett and Julian Humphrey, two other guys that have to be or will be playing big-time snaps at the corner position. And then Ellis Robinson coming in as a freshman is someone that I think could play a huge part, especially if one of those three guys goes down with injury or just doesn't quite play the level of football that he needs to be playing. I could see Ellis Robinson definitely jumping into that role and playing big-time minutes. I saw a tweet earlier about the freshmen that have played plus 300 snaps under Kirby Smart. I think there's multiple that could play 300 snaps in this secondary that are freshmen this year. And let's get to the safety side because that's where the other guy is. Safety to me is kind of a bigger hole, and it's kind of weird to say that just because Malachi Starks is one of the best safeties in the country. So that position I'm not worried about. He is going to hold that down. He's going to be incredible and will be an awesome security blanket for this defense. There's no two ways about that. But a lot of guys are stepping into new roles. A lot of guys are stepping into bigger snaps that they haven't played before. So Johnny Olaguero is one of those guys. He's someone that had kind of been more rotational, situational type guy on the back end. He's now going to be the down in, down out, whether that's nickel or boundary safety, I don't know, but he is going to be in the game pretty much all game. So that is something that he is going to have to really step up to the challenge for. Dan Jackson, another veteran that has played snaps here and there, definitely more of a rotational or special teams guy. He'll be a bigger part of the rotation for sure. But the freshman that I'm watching for this one is KJ Bolden. He's someone that is coming from Buford High School in Buford, Georgia, and the dude can flat out play. Flipping this guy from Florida State on signing day is as big of a flip as Georgia's gotten in quite some time. He's someone that absolutely could play 300 plus snaps next year as a freshman, and I tend to believe he will be the day one starter at one of those safety positions. I'm not exactly sure where he fits into that puzzle, but it's going to be really hard to keep that kid off the field. So the way I look at this kind of hole, if you will, for UGA is they've been able to reload at essentially every position. They've always been able to recruit really well. They've always been able to have enough guys in that room to fill pretty much any hole that they possibly needed to. But at the end of the day, those guys have to step up. You know, the talented guys that you recruit have to become, you know, the big time players on Saturdays. And that's always something that is a lot easier said than done. So it'll be interesting to see how some of those younger guys step up, including Ellis Robinson and KJ Bolden. But let's jump over to Texas, another team that people have a lot of hope in going into 2024, going into the SEC. It doesn't look like anyone is worried that they're going to miss a beat because they're currently second in odds to win the SEC. So a lot of confidence around this team. But if I were to pick an area where they just have to hit or it's going to be a really, really long year is defensive line. And I think this makes total sense. The amount of turnover at that position this offseason for Texas has just been insane. And it's not just players. Obviously, Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy going off to the NFL, those guys were huge for the Texas team last year. And then Bo Davis, the interior defensive line coach, heading out. Kenny Baker coming in from the Miami Dolphins. A lot of turnover in this room, a lot of different things happening. But like UGA, Texas is not clamoring for talent. Talent is not where Texas lacks. That has never really been where they lack. So they have the guys, but the guys have to step up into big positions. Alfred Collins and Vernon Broughton seem to be the two guys that are kind of the leaders in the clubhouse to become the Byron Murphy, Tavondre Sweat of this upcoming year. But a couple other guys to keep your eye on. Jere Bledsoe has done an incredible job, apparently, in the early parts of spring and winter conditioning, and he's someone that the staff seems to love a lot. Sadir Mitchell is somehow bigger than Tavondre Sweat, which is just terrifying to think about. He would be, I think, the second biggest D lineman that has ever come through the draft today. If you were to go through, he's about 372 pounds. So just to give you an idea of the size that they have on that line. And then Aaron Bryant. So all those guys are going to be some rotational guys. I think there will be a lot more rotation this upcoming year at that position than there was a year ago because you don't have those Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy to just hold it down in the entirety of the game. Or at least I don't think they do. So it'll be interesting to see how that rotation works and what guys end up kind of narrowing down those positions. I think Jere Bledsoe is someone that a lot of people don't know the name now, but you will by the middle of the season for sure. And then the edge position is another part of this defensive line that's a little bit different than interior, where there are tons of dudes on this Texas roster that are set to make breakouts at that position. There are so many dudes that have production in their past or are transfers in or whatever it is. But it seems like from a personnel standpoint, this position is in very good shape. Trey Moore, Ethan Burke, Barron Sorrell, all incredible edge rushers, or at least should be incredible edge rushers going into this year. But at the end of the day, the last couple of years since Steve Sarkisian has taken over, getting sacks has been a big problem for this team, and it has really hurt them in some of the games that they definitely could have won but didn't, including the playoff game. There were a couple of times where they got to Michael Penix but couldn't get him on the ground, and that's the entire kind of the entire tale of that game, really. If they were able to get him on the ground a couple more times, maybe they win that game. So I think in terms of what I think will happen with that edge team, I think they will be more than fine. But it is a worry whenever you don't have production from a team perspective going into that year at that position. You got to just hope that some of these guys hit. But they have a ton of guys that have the ability to be absolute game wreckers if you put them in the right position. So I'm not necessarily as worried about edge rushing as interior defensive line, but definitely something to watch there. So let's jump over to the Big Ten now. We got Ohio State, and Ohio State's kind of an interesting one. There are not a lot of holes in this team, I'll be totally honest. But what I landed on was Will Howard in the O-line. The O-line is probably the bigger of the two worries in my eyes, just because last season there were a number of not so great reps from that offensive line. There were a lot of moving parts, some guys coming out with injury, some guys coming in from the transfer portal and having to start right away when it might have been better off, sitting a little bit and kind of getting up to speed a little bit before jumping onto the field. But at the end of the day, O-line just has to be good. But let's talk about Will Howard here for a second. I think there are a lot of people out there talking about Ohio State and saying, well, if Will Howard's under center, there's no chance that they win a title. There's no chance they do what they want to do. It's a Kyle McCord situation all over again. And I think that is just beyond crazy, if I'm being totally honest. I think this is a guy that started 4 years at Kansas State, won a Big 12 championship, has done incredible things in his past, can run and throw the ball, has a ton of tools. And the one biggest difference between him and Kyle McCord is Will Howard has seen way more football than Kyle McCord has at the college football level. And obviously, playing in the Big Ten is a little bit different than playing in the Big 12. There's no two ways about that. And another big hurdle for him will be this offense is going to be different than the one he ran at Kansas State. I think a lot of the run concepts are going to be different. A lot of the pass concepts are going to be different. So he is learning a new playbook. He is kind of learning a playbook that it might be a little bit uncomfortable at first, and he does have to get on the same page with wide receivers. So there are hurdles for Will Howard. There's no two ways about that. But I think if you're an Ohio State fan and you're looking at this team and your biggest worry is Will Howard, you have not a lot to worry about. Because one thing I do know about Will Howard is he's going to come in every day and work his butt off to make sure that he's ready for that moment. He is going to put together an incredible piece of work in every single practice. He's a great leader. I think there are a number of things to like about this kid. So it's a hole in the sense that you never really know what a kid's going to look like until he gets out on that field and you see him in real time. But I would not be worried about Will Howard if I was an Ohio State fan. The O-line would be a little bit more worrisome. And then if the O-line struggles, then Will Howard might become a problem pretty quickly. So those kind of go hand in hand. But the O-line of those two, the O-line is the one that is a little bit more worrisome to me than Will Howard. But let's jump over to another Big Ten team that is getting a lot of attention, Oregon, a team that is jumping up a lot of top 10, top 15, top 25 rankings because of all the talent they brought in from the portal, because of what Dan Lanning is building out there. I talked about it when I did my top 10 coaches. I think he's building an SEC roster all the way out in the Pacific Northwest. So a lot of really interesting things happening in Oregon. But if I was to peg one place where I am a little bit worried about them, it is the pass rush. Brandon Dorlus and Popo Almovaya, I apologize, that was totally butchered, but those two guys were absolutely huge to this team. They made an absolute huge difference. Dorlus especially was an absolute game wrecker at times, made a number of really big time plays. And there are two guys that really need to step up to kind of replace that void, and it's Mateo Uiagalelei, the brother of DJ, and then Jordan Birch, a transfer from South Carolina that came over last year and had a 3-sack season, didn't really have the season that they were hoping for. Mateo Uiagalelei had 2. Brandon Dorlus had 5 by himself, so he doubled them. He essentially was both these players combined. So they have a lot of shoes to fill. They have to definitely step up to the challenge, but I think one of the ways that they got helped out this offseason is Jamari Caldwell coming in from Houston is an absolutely huge pickup. He is someone that they're going to have to double because that is a big fella, and they're not going to be able to handle him just one-on-one on the inside. So that creates a lot more one-on-ones for Jordan Birch or for Mateo Uiagalelei. So those guys are going to get their wins because they're uber athletes. So as long as you put them in as many one-on-ones as you can, I think they could be successful. But pass rush, if you can't get home, it's going to be quite the long year, I think, for Oregon and the Big Ten. But let's jump back to the SEC, and then we'll jump back to the Big Ten for our last one. So Alabama is a team that I think some people think they have no shot at winning a title. I tend to believe they have a very good shot at winning a title, but I suppose we'll figure out with time. And I think one of the biggest areas where they need to be a little bit concerned, possibly go into the portal after spring, is wide receiver. And it's not for necessarily lack of on-paper talent. It's just lack of production in a lot of ways. They lost Isaiah Bond to Texas, who was their leading had their leading receptions, and then Jermaine Burton was their leading receiving yards. So a lot of guys that are walking out the door that need production filled, especially in an offense where your quarterback is not necessarily the most prolific passer in the world. He's more than good at passing, but there is, some worry there. So Kendrick Law, Kobe Prentice, and Jalen Hale are all back. None of them have ever really been the biggest part of the offense. Kendrick Law and Kobe Prentice have played different roles at different times. Jalen Hale has made some really incredible plays, but those were few and far between. So they're going to need those guys to step up. I think bringing in Jeremy Bernard from Washington is huge because he is all the things that those other guys aren't. He is experienced. He is a smart receiver. He knows what it takes to be in a national title. Jeremy Bernard was with Washington a year ago when they made that run. So I think that's a huge addition to that room. I think it gives it some structure that it very much needs. And then Jamarcus Shepard, having him as the position coach is just a huge help to this room because these receivers, while not maybe up to the standards of Alabama, with all of the SEC talent that they have had rolling through there, whether it was Jerry Jeudy or Henry Ruggs or all of just incredible amount, Devontae Smith, obviously, just incredible amounts of receivers rolling through there. This will not be one of those years where they have all first-round receivers all over the field. This will be a little bit more of a patch job, a little bit more of just trying to get the most out of these guys and put them in the right position, but I think they're in a position to do that. I think having Jamarcus Shepard is a huge help, but at the end of the day, if one of those guys doesn't step up and become the number one, Jalen Hale is the one that I'm watching in particular to become that number one wide receiver, but if someone doesn't step up and do it, it could be a really tough season for Jalen Milroe throwing the ball, and if he can't throw the ball, it could be a really tough season just overall because although his legs are incredible, if you can key on that and really hone in on that, it could be tough sledding for him at times. But then finally, let's get to our last team, the team we just talked about in the last segment, Michigan. And we talked about it a little bit, but the quarterback position is very confusing. Obviously, they have Alex Orji up there that played some snaps a year ago and did a really good job. Mostly runs, not a lot of very interesting plays from him, but at the end of the day, he handled business when he had to, and that is really all you could ask for from someone that was that young at the time. Jack Tuttle is also in that room. He has never really played consistently, so I wouldn't necessarily bank on him being the guy. And then Jaden Davis is a freshman coming in, uber talented, probably will be the quarterback in 2025, but I'm not sure if he's ready for the big lights quite yet in 2024. But he's someone that absolutely, if he comes along a little bit faster than I'm expecting could be the guy. So it'll be interesting to see how that quarterback room shakes out. I think one of the big helps to that quarterback room is the running back room that they have. Donovan Edwards and Khalil Mullings is a great running back duo. Having the O-line will likely be solid just because Sharon Moore knows how to coach offensive line. They've been recruiting it incredibly well. So even though losing 6 guys to the NFL, all 5 starters, they should be able to reload at that position and just keep the train rolling there. But Michigan is in a position where I think they can definitely make a lot of noise if they can figure out this quarterback position. But there is that other scenario. There is that bottoming out scenario where they don't have a guy like J.J. McCarthy that takes care of the ball remarkably well and doesn't miss a ton of passes and can put the ball where it needs to be on time. So a Michigan offense that is so dependent on these guys that we call game managers, these guys that, don't necessarily make big-time flash plays all the time, but they make the right play over and over. It's hard to replace that, and especially with some of the guys that they have in the room, because Jack Tuttle has struggled with interceptions in the past. Alex Orji is not necessarily the greatest passer of the football, and Jaden Davis might just be a little bit too young, and with young comes mistakes. So there's a lot to be interested in with this quarterback room. I think spring will be huge for them to figure this out. I would not be surprised if they dip their toe into the portal after spring if all of these things don't come to fruition the way they like. But at the end of the day, I think Michigan, if they can figure out that quarterback position, they're ready to go. If they can't, then it could be kind of an ugly season after what was a remarkable one a year ago. But that'll do it for the Michigan talk for the day. A lot of Michigan on this show, but we're going to take our last break of the show, and when we come back, we're going to talk about my Hot Take Thursday, a little bit about NIL. Some of you might agree, some of you might not agree, but I think it's a good one. I think it's one that a lot of people are talking about right now. So definitely stick with us, and we will be right back with that. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the biggest glaring holes for the big-time contenders in college football going into 2024, but now it's time for Hot Take Thursday, and this one is kind of a doozy. So NIL has been a big topic of conversation, especially this week, going through the NIL roundtable and all of the different things that have been happening around the sport. And I want to start all of this by saying I am in full favor of NIL opportunities for athletes. I am in full favor of the transfer portal and letting kids find the school that will either let them play or find where they really belong and where they're really happy and kind of can develop as a person the best. So I'm not against any of that. So the player power, I'm all for. I just think we've created a lot of power for the players without a lot of guidelines for them to wield it the way that they should. So NIL, as we all know, was thrown into this mix with not a lot of guardrails, not a lot of rules or regulations, or just not a lot of vision, really, from the NCAA, because a lot of states forced their hand, and they were way behind on it. it's created a lot of problems, and I think it's a lot of problems that have disenthused a ton of fans. So NIL has kind of created a recruiting world where a group of coaches can walk into your living room and talk to your mom, your dad, you, and your siblings and tell you some things that might not be true. And it's not necessarily that they're going in outright trying to lie to this kid or be distruthful in any way, but there are some promises that they make that sometimes can't be fulfilled. I mean, we saw it with Jaden Rashada when he was getting recruited by Florida. He claimed there were some promises they made in the NIL world that couldn't be fulfilled once he stepped onto campus, so he found his way over to Arizona State. So a lot of this stuff has created a atmosphere where, since it's the Wild West, since there are not a lot of rules around this, the coaches and the recruiters and all of these people that, run the college football world have taken full advantage, and they've used it in such a way that it's kind of, I don't want to say take advantage of the players, but definitely using a certain amount of them knowing what's going on, but the players not, to their advantage. And it's something that has hurt a lot of players in this recruiting cycle, and especially in the transfer portal, which I'll get to here in a second. But players should have full control over their future. I fully believe that. I think there is no reason that they should have to, ride out 4 years at a school if they're really unhappy there, or if it's not the best thing for their career or for themselves. So I fully want them to be able to make the decisions they want, whether it's the transfer portal or NIL or anything like that. But I do think we gave them all this power, and there's not really an idea of what the landscape looks like. So all of the decisions they're making, they're not really sure if they're the right decisions. They're not sure if they're even okay decisions to be making in this new world, because there are so many question marks around it. So there's a lot going into this, and the transfer portal has been something that a lot of fans have taken big time exception with. A lot of fans are not into the transfer portal. They think it is a huge problem with college football. I'm all for the transfer portal. I think it's a great thing for these kids to, go and find where they need to be. But at the end of the day, they had a rule in place for a time that said you can transfer penalty-free one time before you have to sit for a year if you want to transfer another time. They did away with that rule because, again, they felt like players should have full autonomy. I mean, coaches have full autonomy to do what they want, so why shouldn't players? Which is an argument that I wish I had a good rebuttal for, but I don't. So that is definitely a big part of this, and I fully understand why that decision was made. But I think there is some type of problems going on, especially tied to NIL in regards to the transfer portal, that have created a lot of problems for these kids. So I think them being able to transfer whenever they want is not the problem. The problem is more the ability for these coaches of teams that they could be transferring to, being able to essentially reach out whenever they want. Obviously, there are certain periods where they're not allowed to. They're not allowed to until they're in the portal. I think me and you, we both know that's probably not the case. There are probably a number of happenings behind the scenes that we do not know about. I'm sure there are a lot of student athletes that are gearing up for practice or something that are getting texts from other coaches, and it's not something that we can have happen. It's not something that is good for the sport. It's not something that's good for the kid, because we had this idea for such a long time that it's going to be great for these players when they have all this power to make money through NIL, and they have the power to go wherever they want in the transfer portal and make all these decisions for themselves. And that's all well and good. The power itself is not necessarily the problem. The system under which the power is being distributed is a big problem, because you have the power to make those decisions. You don't have the knowledge really to make those decisions, because the NIL world is all over the place. So this kind of brings me to my maybe second hot take of this one, but we need someone to step up, and it might be a single individual, it might be an entity, I don't know, but someone needs to step up and start making concrete change, because at the end of the day, the further this goes on, the more kids that get left behind. There are a number of kids that jump into the portal looking for a big payday or looking for playing time, and they end up finding themselves just studying psychology at the school because they didn't get an offer from anyone. They didn't get a chance to play their sport at any other school. So they're left to be a normal college student now. So there's so many different pitfalls in this that someone that understands the sport, someone that is at the forefront of the sport, needs to be the one to kind of step up and be the forefront of this movement. And Nick Saban seemed to try to. At the NIL roundtable, he had a number of things to say about NIL and the pitfalls that come. He shared a very interesting story where Miss Terry essentially said, all these kids care about is money. Why do we do this anymore? And while I don't necessarily disagree with a young kid who is trying to make it to the next level, wanting some money from this business, it does create problems for coaches and for players. So Nick Saban obviously is one of the biggest names in the sport. He is someone that has spoken ad nauseum about paying athletes. He has been a big fan of revenue sharing for a very long time. He has been at the forefront of paying these student athletes for a very long time. So there were a number of people that saw the quote that said, all the things I've loved in the sport over the last 50 years are gone, and took that to mean that he doesn't want the kids to make money. And that is not even remotely what he said. If you listen to the rest of the comment, he is a huge proponent of kids getting paid. He just wants them to get paid in a system that makes sense. And I think that's something that would be better for him, it would be better for the sport, and it would be better for the kids. So it would take a little bit of power out of their hands in terms of they would probably have to sign a contract to stay at a school for X period of time, whether that's 2 or 3 years. They would probably have to, be a little bit more bound to a school and not have quite as much freedom. But at least they would know the system that they're working under. At least they know that the money is coming in. At least they know what the money would be, because I'm sure there have been people that have had very varying months of NIL revenue that have come in and have struggled because of it. Because a lot of these kids that are being presented with a lot of money early on in their lives. I mean, I'm a very young kid. I was a college kid not too long ago. And I'll tell you, I would have, if someone offered me, a couple $1,000s to do something for a brand deal, that money be gone pretty quickly. So there is the pitfall of, yes, you're giving these guys the ability to go make their own money, but there is variability in what that money can be and what that money is going to look like month by month or year by year. So there are a lot of pitfalls. And Nick Saban is someone that is doing something that not a lot of people have been doing over the last however long in this sport, especially around NIL, which is just trying. This is a complicated issue. There is no two ways about that. There is no right answer to NIL. I am very far from having any type of answer for NIL that makes everyone happy, to be totally honest, because it is a very convoluted issue. It makes very little sense on the surface because of the lack of rules and regulations. But at the end of the day, there's a guy in front of us that knows the sport better than anyone. He was the sport for a very long time. He dominated it. He knows the players better than pretty much anyone in the sport. He cares about the sport, which is more than I can say about some of the people making big-time decisions in college football right now. And he loves the players. And I know some of you might object to that. I promise you, he would not be in this business for as long as he had, and his players would not speak as highly of him as they do if he did not love his players and care about his players. So my point mainly being in all of this, someone is trying to step up and at least get us 1 inch down the road. Let them do it. I think there are a lot of fans that are hesitant because it is Nick Saban, because he was the mean old Grinch that took over the sport for some time, that they're forgetting we need to fix some of these problems. And 1% better is still better than where we are, right? We don't need to fix all of this all at once. We don't need to create a comprehensive plan that fixes every single problem we have today and consequence that could come forward and have this incredible setup starting tomorrow. But we need to start taking steps towards that. So let Nick Saban speak. Listen to what Nick Saban says because he knows what he's talking about. And then if we want to try it, let's try it. Like revenue sharing, let's try it. And I think that's the future of the sport. But my point mainly being, there are so many issues with this sport. There are so many hurdles that we're going to have to get over the next little bit, that when people step up to the plate and try to give you answers, don't just write them off. Don't just, kick them to the curb or say, you're just being bitter, or you don't want players to be paid, or X, Y, and Z. You could say a number of different things. But at the end of the day, college football needs people to step up and start doing things good for college football. And I trust very little people on planet Earth to do that than Nick Saban, because he is someone that loves the sport, loves the players, has been around the sport, has more knowledge about the sport than anyone maybe on planet Earth. So he is someone that we just have to lean on at this point in time. We have to take what he says, take it seriously, and then if we want to implement it. If it doesn't work, go back to the drawing board. But at the end of the day, start trying things, because the longer we don't try, the longer we say this is a problem, but when we come to actual solutions, throw up our hands and say that's not the right solution, the longer these kids get taken advantage of, and the longer these kids are in precarious situations, and the longer that these coaches are going to start leaving the sport that we love so much. There have been a number of coaches that have left. Nick Saban, this definitely played a part in him retiring when he did. I think he still had juice in the tank, but he was just tired of the way that things were working. Jay Wright, another great example from the men's college basketball space, he left because of this new era that we're in. He just wasn't enthused by it. So he's someone that was a big part of college football, won 2 national championships, or college basketball, excuse me. So all of these guys, they know what they're talking about. They know who they are. They know the sport. They know the players. They know the pitfalls of all of this stuff. So when they step up and try to give a solution, let's just listen, try to implement the solution. If it doesn't work, go back to the drawing board, because that's what all of this is about, is taking that one step forward and then taking another step forward and then another step. So it's going to be a long battle. NIL is far from being fixed by any means, but at the end of the day, we finally have people stepping up, actually trying real solutions, actually putting themselves in front of Congress or in front of the NCAA or wherever he needs to be. Nick Saban is finally stepping up to the plate, and I just hope that we all listen and we all at least try to implement some of the ideas that he has put out there, like revenue sharing, because I think those are the people that we need to be listening to in a college football world where it's run by a lot of people that we shouldn't be listening to, but we have to. But I'll leave it at that. I'll leave that segment there. So that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. We, again, are presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a ton to us, so please remember to subscribe and leave a positive review. It makes a huge difference for us. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social media pages for all the content and updates throughout pretty much every sport you could think of. If you are a wrestling fan, we got that covered. If you're a baseball fan, we have that covered. So tons of really good people doing incredible work here. So definitely check out all of those pages. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.